Feeling better after the budget? Well, maybe if you're already rich. Let's ignore the fact that Jezza lied about it being a tax reducing budget and all the other government claims. They've been well covered and largely proved to be an absolute load of bollocks. Let's ignore the fact that despite saying getting rid of the non-dom tax would damage the country, they stole the idea from Labour. But it won't come into force for 4 years to give their friends time to move their money and property portfolios around and avoid it. Let's ignore the fact that rather than a budget for the country, it was a headline-grabbing exercise carried out to set a trap for Labour when they get into office. Let's ignore the fact that the Chancellor, as he always does, blamed the pandemic and the Ukraine war for the economic situation, but failed to mention Brexit or Kwasi Kwarteng's economy-trashing budget. Instead, let's look at the mood of the budget and what he didn't say was important. Hunt's first claim was that him and Rishi inherited an 11% rate of inflation. He didn't mention that they inherited from the past 14 years of their own party being in power, and that Rishi was Chancellor through much of that time. He talked about investing in the NHS with an IT system that will free up time and make it more efficient, but he didn't mention that the contract for that will likely go to Infosys, the company owned by Rishi's wife's family. He talked about a totally data-driven service, but didn't mention Palantir, the US company who've paid £1 for all that data, and incidentally also donate to Housing Minister Lee Rowley, my hopefully soon-to-be ex-MP. He talked about the same kind of investment for all public services, but he didn't mention the effect on jobs. And has there ever been a major IT rollout from the government that didn't involve massive profits for their donors, or didn't go hugely over budget and take much longer than expected? He made a personal dig at Angela Rayner, who bought a house perfectly legally under the Tories' right to buy scheme. When she sold it, she made a profit. That's it, same as many people have done, nothing to see. He didn't mention that he himself bought 7 luxury flats in Southampton, taking advantage of the multi-dwellings relief, which means he paid reduced stamp duty and he receives a substantial rent from them. He also didn't mention that people buying property with an annex, for example to look after family members, will now have to pay stamp duty on both those properties. But what can you expect from the party that simply doesn't give a fuck about ordinary people and thinks they're entitled to do whatever they want and the taxpayer will pick up the bill? For example, Science Minister Michelle Donelan, who publicly called an academic a Hamas supporter. He sued her for libel and she agreed to pay 15 grand in an out-of-court settlement. Turns out the taxpayer picks up the bill, and they've spun it by saying they settled to save us a cost of protected legal proceedings. I'll tell you what have saved money, not lying for political gain and paying for your own mistakes. Or how about our short-lived Prime Minister Liz Truss? Remember her? She crashed the economy, increased your monthly outgoings far more than you'll get, even if you do benefit from the budget. Turns out, after a Freedom of Information request, in fact 2 years after, it's been revealed she spent £15,000 on in-flight catering on a single trip when she was Foreign Secretary. £1,400 a head for 12 officials. And the details were released to a media outlet so they could bury it amongst the budget news instead of to Labour's Emily Thornberry, who requested the information, totally against what should happen. Oh, and she still claims £115,000 annually, which she gets for being a former Prime Minister, despite only doing the job badly for 49 days, thank God. If you think it's time they just gave in to the will of the people they're always banging on about and get on with calling an election, why not subscribe, share the video and set notifications?